I'd like to call the August 8th, 2013 meeting of the Williamsburg City Council to order. Ms. Scott, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knudsen?
Here.
Mr. Pons?
Here.
Mayor Holman?
Here.
Vice Mayor Fryling?
Here.
Mr. Foster?
Here.
First order of business today is council minutes for the meetings of July 11th, 2013, July 9th, 2013 City Council ARB joint meeting, and the July 29th, 2013 special meeting. Do I have any additions or corrections?
Mr. Mayor, I move that council approve the minutes from the July 9th, 2013 City Council ARB joint meeting, the July 11th, 2013 City Council meeting, and the July 29th, 2013 special meeting.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Our next order of business is matters of special privilege, and while we don't have any on the agenda, I did want to mention that our police chief was featured in the Next Door Neighbor magazine in a very nice piece. We all knew how great you are. I hope this helps the rest of the community appreciate, Dave, what a terrific job you do for us and what a wonderful individual you are. So just... Next order of business is public hearings, and today we have three. The first is PCR 13-26, which is the request of Great Knights Incorporated for a special use permit to increase residential density for a new mixed-use project on Prince George Street, North Boundary Streets, including landscape waivers for SPR 13-008.
Mayor Holman and members of council, as you just stated, this is a request by Great Knights for a special use permit to increase the residential density from 14 to 15.1 dwelling units per net acre for 4 properties on Prince George Street. And that's the area, Prince George and North Boundary Street, outlined in red. The applicant proposes a new mixed-use building on Prince George Street with commercial on the first floor, with a total of 8 residential units on the second and third floor. And in red here is the proposed new building. They have 1 dwelling unit here, 1 here currently, the Fife and Drum Inn Cottage, I call it here, and the Imperial Building. This is a floor plan of the commercial floor space, and this is the layout of the apartments on the second and third floor. These parcels are designated downtown commercial land use in the comp plan. This category is intended to promote a variety of businesses in the downtown planning area. Residential uses are recommended at a base density of 14 dwelling units per net acre, with increased density with special use permit. The primary consideration for the approval of increased density should be how the scale and character of the proposed project relates to the immediate surrounding and to the downtown planning area as a whole. These properties are located in the B1 Downtown Business District. The Architectural Review Board approved the building design and demolition of 2 buildings on Prince George Street, the old Colonial Sports Building and the adjacent vacant building at 517. As stated before, this request is to increase the density from 14 to 15.1 dwelling units per net acre. Based on the size of the property, 9 units are allowed by right. 2 dwelling units currently exist on the property. With the addition of 8 new units, the new mixed-use building, a total of 10 units are proposed. The comprehensive plan supports additional units if the scale and character of the proposed project relates to its immediate surroundings and to the downtown planning area. This project meets that requirement because the scale and character of the proposal relates to the streetscape along Prince George Street. And here you have the Imperial Building, the proposed project, and this is the adjacent project next door. The final site plan has been submitted along with the special use permit request. The existing haphazardly arranged parking area behind these buildings will be rearranged, paved, and will provide 26 parking spaces. The applicant has requested a waiver of 5 feet of the 15-foot landscape area required by the zoning ordinance for the area between North Boundary Street and the parking lot for a total of approximately 200 square feet. And that area is for these area here and right here adjacent to North Boundary Street. To meet the requirement, 2 parking spaces would need to be removed. Staff supported the waiver because of the applicant proposes a 42-inch white wooden picket fence along the entire frontage of North Boundary Street. This new fence will create a harmonious edge for the property and unify the site's landscape design along North Boundary Street. The fence, along with the proposed new landscaping, will mitigate the loss of the 200 square feet of landscape area proposed to be waived. Planning Commission held a public hearing on July the 19th, and one citizen spoke at the public hearing. Planning Commission recommends to City Council by a vote of 6-0 that a special use permit be granted for the increase in density from 9 to 10 units as proposed by the applicant. Planning Commission also approved the site plan with conditions as noted in my memo. One of the conditions was approval of the landscape waiver as requested by the applicant. Therefore, it is recommended to approve the special use permit for the increase in density from 14 to 15.1 dwelling units per net acre and the landscape waiver for the 2 parking areas. I'd be happy to answer any questions you may have.
Kellen, thank you very much. Before I open the public hearing, I'll come back to council for any questions for Carolyn.
Ms. Murphy, what are the number of existing spaces currently on the site?
Well, the spaces currently are just some along in here and just scattered all about in the back. It's currently graveled, so this would make the spaces meet our ordinance requirements, and also it'll be paved. So the spaces are in the general area, but it'll be paved and be marked and also have landscaping.
I mean, do you think the site has more than 15 spaces currently?
Currently, I think it's probably, we averaged between 25 and 28. It depends on how you measure the space based on the gravel areas, and some of the gravel areas has grass and those types of things. So I would say between 25 and 28.
Thank you.
Doug, no questions? Judy?
Who is going to be able to park there? The tenants in the building?
This is parking for this property, so it would be up to the landlord as to who gets to park there. It could be a certain number of spaces for the apartment folks and spaces for the other tenants who not only at least would occupy this building, but also the Imperial building and the other 3 buildings that are on the property.
That's probably not enough parking for everybody who's an occupant.
Well, it meets our parking requirement for the downtown parking area. It's up to the owner to decide, I think, based on that, as to if it's enough parking for his tenants or whether he needs to find additional spaces somewhere else.
Thank you.
And any other questions? Thank you, Carolyn. With that, I'll open the public hearing. Anybody who wishes to address this, please come forward and state your name. And I do have one speaker's card for this, and that's Billy Scruggs.
Thank you, Mayor Hallman. City Council members, I'm Billy Scruggs. I live at 119 Woodmere Court. My wife and I also own and operate the Fife and Drum Inn, which is across Boundary Street in the Hitchens building. And Caroline, we call that the Drummer's Cottage, is what we call that. I just wanted to address this issue today and tell you how much we are in support of this. We're very excited about the additional tenants. We look at this as to what Planning Commission and councils for, I think, 10 or 12 years now have been saying. And work session the other day, you talked about the vibrancy and the, to have things happening downtown. We can't do that without people. I think that it's going to be great. We're just really looking forward to it, so I hope that you all will approve this request.
Great. Thank you, Bill.
Thank you.
Does anybody else wish to address this particular issue? If not, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for discussion and action. Mr. Friley?
When I think back to the conversations that we had recently during the development of the comprehensive plan and then the implementation of the plan through the rezoning process, one of the questions was regarding the allowable increases in density and what sorts of projects would that engender, and shouldn't we be worried about that? And I think this is a fine example of exactly the type of project we would have hoped would come out of that, where you have a very creative reuse of property, a significant improvement to the parking infrastructure, even though it's just for this property, that will enhance the overall street appeal of the area, even with the reduced buffer and the picket fence. I think it's an urban area, and there's nothing wrong with seeing an entrance to a parking lot, because it's a cue to those people. This is where I need to enter and exit the parking. Sometimes in Williamsburg, we have a well-intentioned but maybe overly cautious way of hiding some things that people need to know about. I think that the mass of the building is appropriate in between the Imperial Building and the hoped-for and long-awaited construction of Prince George Commons, and what it does to extend the Prince George Street scape all the way down towards the Triangle Building, which then creates the next step in connecting the Hospitality House Stadium area with downtown and Merchant Square is really important to what we're trying to accomplish on what some call a back street or back alleyway. But I mean, I think it's an important pedestrian connection between two vital areas of commerce in the city. And the more we can connect the student population in the Hospitality House, or former, I guess it's One Tribe Place, I need to correct myself, and bring them down into Merchant Square, and the more we can help the folks who are visiting explore down the street farther, the more opportunities we'll give people to do things, and the more opportunities for enjoyment of their stay, and hopefully help them appreciate that there is a lot to do here in Williamsburg. So I think this is well thought out. I think from everything I've seen, it's attractive. My one concern, and it's not about this project specifically or in particular, it's in general about the downtown area, is ensuring going forward that we're able to develop and maintain a significant enough parking infrastructure to allow enough people to come down and find a place to park and shop. I personally think there are plenty of places to park. But what's more important is how do people perceive the downtown area when they want to come here, and do they feel as though I don't want to go because it might be hard to find a parking place. So this is a great step, but I think it helps us appreciate the next steps we might need to take in order to, as a municipality, to make more parking available for folks.
Great, thanks. Scott?
For the people who listen to me talk about my vision for downtown, I've been talking about a development, a model, for a long time, and just in the peripheral sense. It's excited that I finally have something to point to as, exactly what I've been talking about. This fits within all the good discussions, the good work that was done during the comprehensive plan process. It's a building and project that will meet the trifecta of need in this community. Resident interest, tourist interest, and student interest. I'm just, it's so nice to see this finally coming to fruition. So,
Thanks.
I concur.
Yeah.
I do too.
Yeah. No, I think, Mr. Granger, looks like you read the EDA's strategic plan and the comprehensive plan, because this is exactly the kind of things those talked about. So we appreciate you bringing this forward, and I think, as you've just heard, it exactly fits the vision that I think the community has for the downtown area. So we congratulate you on that. I'm congratulating you before we vote, but I think it's pretty clear the way this is going. With that, I'll ask for a motion.
Mr. Mayor, I move to approve the special use permit for the increase in density from 14 to 15.1 dwelling units per net acre, including approval of the landscape waivers for the two parking areas adjacent to North Boundary Street, SPR number 13-008.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Newton.
Aye.
Mr. Pons.
Aye.
Mayor Holman.
Aye.
Vice Mayor Farley.
Aye.
Mr. Foster.
Aye.
Again, thanks. This is a good project and fits downtown. And also, we're going to be doing a project that extends the Prince George treatment between Henry and Boundary to that next block, and that fits terrifically with this project. So
Timing is perfect.
Yep, you got it. Okay, our next public hearing is PCR 13-27, zoning ordinance amendment to give the zoning administrator authority to grant waivers from site plan requirements. This is proposed ordinance 13-29. Nice to see you back from Chesapeake, Mr. Nestor.
Traffic was a little slow on the way back, but I made it here on time.
Good.
we have a perfectly good waiver process for site plans. We've had it since 1991. It allows Planning Commission to grant waivers if certain conditions are met as part of the site plan review process. We have one problem with the process, though, and that is in 2012, the state Supreme Court said Planning Commission doesn't have the authority to grant waivers. But they also observed that the state code empowers local governing bodies to enact ordinances that authorize their zoning administrator to grant modifications. So with this in mind, this proposal shifts the waiver granting from Planning Commission, or now it's been City Council by default, and you granted a waiver in conjunction with the case you just approved. We had one last month with the 7-Eleven on 2nd Street. So this would have this done by the zoning administrator, but it would be done during the site plan review process. When we talk about waivers, we're talking about waivers from a number of things, not the use. That's controlled by the zoning ordinance, but this would be construction on steep slopes, aisle width and parking lots, required landscaping, perimeter landscaping and parking lots, like the waiver you granted today, reducing that from 15 feet to 10 feet. The proposed ordinance you have before you lists specific standards for the granting of waivers, doesn't produce undue hardship, not shared generally, won't be of substantial detriment to adjacent property. There's also procedural steps built into the ordinance. Prior to granting a waiver, the zoning administrator is required to give all adjoining property owners written notice and an opportunity to respond within 21 days. If the waiver is granted, any person aggrieved can appeal the zoning administrator's decision to the Board of Zoning Appeals within 30 days. So this is as good a solution as we can come up with now based on what the state Supreme Court said, not as good as what we have had since 1991, though. The Commission held a public hearing on July 17th. No one spoke at the hearing, and the Commission recommended to City Council by a 6-0 vote that the zoning ordinance be amended to grant the zoning administrator the authority to grant waivers to site plan requirements as is detailed in proposed ordinance 1329.
Great. Thank you very much, Reed. Again, before I open the public hearing, I'll come back to council for any questions. Okay. Thank you again, Reed. With that, I'll open the public hearing and ask anyone who wishes to speak to this issue to please come forward, state your name and address. I have no speakers cards on this, and I don't see a rush of the podium on this either. So with that, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for discussion and action.
Mr. Mayor, I'll move the approval of proposed ordinance 13-29.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Hans?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Thank you. The final public hearing today is the amendment to the special events license to conduct Revolutionary City Program, proposed resolution 13-12. Do we have a staff presentation on this today, or?
No, we do not.
Okay, so we had a substantial discussion at our Monday work session on this, and are there any questions for staff before I open the public hearing? Or, I think we...
I have a comment,
Yeah,
if I may.
Yes.
As an employee of the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation, I'll refrain from discussing this matter and abstain from voting on it.
Okay, terrific. With that, I'll open the public hearing and ask anyone who wishes to speak to this to please come forward. President Campbell, I see you sitting there.
Dying to speak. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Members of the council, I appreciate the opportunity to be with you once again this week. On Monday, I proposed for your consideration an extension of the trial period of expanded managed access to provide Revolutionary City programming through November 2014. In the 7 weeks we've offered the expanded programming for our guests, we've learned a lot. And that is, after all, the purpose of a trial. And it has become clear through that trial that the significant conceptual shift this expanded programming represents offers more lessons to be learned, which is the purpose of the proposed extension. But this period has reaffirmed our sense that the reasons for developing Revolutionary City programming initially remain valid. Museums, like other organizations, must adapt to changes in society, including the introduction and increased use of new technologies. To be relevant, to be vibrant, to be successful over the long term, we must be innovative. Innovation in museums is increasingly focused on how to engage guests directly, to break down barriers, to involve them in the action in some way. We certainly have guests who enjoy walking the streets, visiting the gardens, and going on expert tours. But if we are to attract new audiences, we need to provide the kind of opportunities for active participation that characterize the Revolutionary City and RevQuest. This challenge of attracting new audiences in a highly competitive marketplace is at the intersection of the Foundation's educational mission and our collective economic imperative. Revolutionary City programming is central to Colonial Williamsburg's response to this challenge, a compelling narrative of Williamsburg and the American Revolution intended to bring new, larger, and more diverse audiences to Williamsburg. And yes, to be relevant, to be vibrant, to be successful over the long term. As we have previously shared with you, the new Revolutionary City programming serves as the core on-site experience of our History and Citizenship Initiative by providing guests with an experience that is engaging, authentic, entertaining, and inspirational. It continues to evolve to encompass more action, more activities, and an ambiance designed to create a genuine community feel, complete with street theater and interactions on the street with people of the past. This programming allows more staff to be out of buildings, on the street, part of the action. To help break down those barriers, additional staff will serve as customer service representatives along access points, welcoming guests while informing them about the value of a ticket. An extension of the trial period allows experience with all of the programming seasons of the year, each of which presents varying visitation patterns and demographics, programmatic offerings and themes, as well as a range of managed access approaches. This extended trial also provides us with an opportunity to complete an informative and statistically reliable research initiative, one that will include input from both ticketed and non-ticketed guests. We want to learn more about guest preferences. It is essential that we know what they like and what they don't like. That is in our best interests. The research initiative will help us assess the impact that the managed access environment is having on non-ticketed guests. This is important to us and to the community. The research will also direct us on how we can more effectively appeal to our audiences. Our current ticket structure is currently being evaluated for 2014 by our management team. We're seeking in this process to align the experience we offer with the ticketing structure to give our guests more choices that are both economical and can be customized to meet their needs, the needs of our guests. To support this initiative, we must have the technology in place to make it easy for our guests and the on-site sales team to connect with one another. This will include professionally trained sales staff, handheld units, moving towards smartphone purchases and ticketing, and similar innovations. And we intend to evaluate the Good Neighbor program to make these relationships, which are so important to us, within our community, easy, beneficial, and valued. Should Council approve this request, we report seasonally on findings, on results, and on lessons learned. As I've said on previous occasions, the City of Williamsburg and Colonial Williamsburg are inextricably linked. Our successes are shared successes. Our challenges are shared challenges. The proposed extension will permit Colonial Williamsburg and the community to address thoughtfully and with solid information the issue of managed access on a trial basis. I believe we can do this effectively. We are very mindful of questions about the proposal raised by members of the Council and by citizens, and we want to be responsive. We want to be responsive in the spirit of one community, working together to achieve great success in tourism. If we do not work together on this very challenging environment, neither of us is likely to realize our shared potential. Thank you very much.
Thank you, President Campbell. I have 3 speakers' cards, and then anyone else who wishes to speak may do so as well. The first is Pam, and I may mispronounce this, Pouchet? No, I took a guess.
Close. Pouchot.
Pouchet, thank you.
Name is Pam Pouchot. I reside at 103 Kimberly Court in Yorktown, Virginia. My husband and I reside in Lower York County. We are not eligible for Good Neighbor passes. We do visit downtown Williamsburg at least 4 to 6 times per month. We spend money at the farmers market, the Merchant Square shops and restaurants, at art shows, programs at the library and the theater, and as well at CW's bakery, shops, and restaurants that are open to those without tickets. However, the reason we choose to do this in Williamsburg is that we truly enjoy the walk down Duke of Gloucester Street from Merchant Square to the House of Burgesses and back. CW now wants us to pay a $128 yearly toll to walk down a public road funded by the taxpayers. We will not do so. I was speaking with a merchant last weekend, and it said she had a customer that day that only had about an hour in town and wanted to know what she could do in that time frame. Buying a $42 day ticket would have been absurd for that particular person. If she liked what she saw on a stroll down Dog Street, she would have come back when she had more time and more than likely bought an admission ticket. I do not think CW realizes that many of those who do stroll down Dog Street without tickets often decide that they want to see more and purchase tickets for some other day. In September, I will host out-of-state guests whom I planned to bring to CW. They would have purchased tickets. I would have waited outside the buildings while I participated in the tours. Now, that will not happen. I will not pay $42 to $64 for something I have already seen on numerous occasions. Closing Duke of Gloucester Street does not make economic sense for the City of Williamsburg. It makes no sense to alienate residents of the peninsula. I am not even sure CW will actually see an increase in tourist dollars. I tend to think they will lose as well. I doubt the Founding Fathers would have approved of denying citizens the right to walk down their very own streets. If you choose to do this, at least save some taxpayer dollars on street maintenance and sell CW the streets of Williamsburg so they can fence it off, as is their ultimate goal anyway. Then there will be no public streets to quibble about, and we will find ourselves somewhere else to visit and spend our money. At a public hearing on June 11, 1928, a Williamsburg resident, Major S.D. Freeman, said, "We will reap dollars, but will we own our town?" Williamsburg was unique in that, unlike other living history museums, anyone can walk through the historic district of Williamsburg free of charge at any hour of the day. What a pity to lose that right. Right before this meeting, a gentleman who is employed by CW wanted to compare it to, well, what do you pay to stroll down the streets of Busch Gardens? Busch Gardens is private property. I don't go anyway, but it's private property. If I went, I would pay. Thank you.
Thank you very much. The next speaker's card I have is Bill Cafes. Bill, welcome back.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. At the work session on Monday, the Colonial Williamsburg folks said that they had to tighten up access to the so-called managed access area, the restricted access area, because people were coming through without tickets. They said, in fact, about 40% of the folks who came in before the tightening up had no tickets. As a result of the tightening up, only 20%. And they do let some people in for shopping and so on. So 40%, by their records, are people who don't have tickets. Why should they have them? Actually, the figures are much more significant than that. In the Colonial Williamsburg President's Report for the year 2010, Mr. Campbell noted as follows: about 1.7 million people walked our streets. Roughly the same as in 2009. Our paid attendance had increased by 4% to 686,000. Well, if you divide 686,000 by 1,000,007, only 40% of that 1,000,007 bought tickets. So the ticket holders are a subset of the much larger number of visitors to the city. The visitors to the city are our guests, and I think we should make available to them the full opportunity to stroll our streets at any time. It's significant to me that the CW folks said nothing along the lines that allowing or having these interlopers come in any way compromised the program. Obviously it didn't. And in fact, at the June council meeting, when this was first discussed, the question was asked of the CW people as to what they would do if this trial period was not permitted. They said, well, we'll go ahead with it. These are our plans. So that there's no indication whatsoever that the Rev City program could not proceed without these restrictions on access. And in fact, I would really think it would be to Colonial Williamsburg's advantage to make this something available to everyone. That's another story. So anyway, who are the second-class visitors? This 1,100,000 visitors who may be denied access to, free access that is, to Duke of Gloucester Street. Obviously, they cover a very broad spectrum. There are people who have been here on multiple occasions and come back. They don't want to necessarily tour the palace again or the Capitol or the Wythe House and so on, but they keep coming back because they really like it here, and thank God they do, and they certainly should. Some of them undoubtedly are people who support Colonial Williamsburg by being members of their membership group, 110,000 people. How do they feel being turned away or challenged as to the right to walk the street? I doubt that they would enjoy that very much. So we have a large number of visitors. These are our customers. I'm talking about the city. I'm not talking about the Colonial Williamsburg Foundation. And the way we treat them and the value that we accord them by making this visit is critical to a continuation of any sort of a tourism economy here. And we should treat everyone here as an honored guest, whether they buy a Colonial Williamsburg ticket or not. They spend money. One subset, for example, of people who walk Duke of Gloucester Street are timeshare residents. There are thousands of timeshare units here. Each one probably encompasses maybe 80 different owners. They come back regularly. They bought into future vacations here. They come here. They spend money. They go to the food line. They buy dog food. They buy toilet paper. And they pay a sales tax on that. As you know, Mayor Holman, 20% of the sales tax revenues come to the city. That funds our so-called 1% fund that we use to expand the public buildings here. Do we want to chase these people away or make it more difficult to them, for them to be here? I'm sure we don't. Also, Mayor Holman, I would call your attention to something I know you're very familiar with, and that is the August 2010 Economic and Diversification in America's Historic Triangle report as presented by the Historic Triangle Collaboration. There's lots of talk in there about broadening our tourism economy beyond historic tourism, sports tourism, for example. So here, on the one hand, we're trying to bring people to the city for a variety of reasons, but one of the attractions that we offer them, and certainly a critical one, is the ambiance of the historic district. I think we'd make a huge mistake if we limit that or take that away from people. Success in the hospitality field really obviously depends on how you treat the customer. For the 22 years before I retired in 1994, I was employed by Marriott Corporation. When I began work there 40 years ago, in 1972, we had 35 hotels. There are over 5,000 now. Now, what do you attribute that phenomenal success to? A lot of factors, certainly. But one of the key factors was the mantra in that company over and over and over again, to treating the customer right, treating the employees right, and giving good value. We, the city, subsidize advertising in the tourist community. We're inviting people in. At the same time, for a majority of them, we now plan to limit their experience here. I think that's a big mistake. So I would really urge you to deny this request. Please don't kick this time bomb down the road. Let's diffuse it now. And when the current permit runs out, then that would be the subject of a further discussion, obviously. We need to take the high road. This is an important city. We have a mission beyond that most cities enjoy. The same mission, actually, as Colonial Williamsburg, that the future may learn from the past. Let's not limit that. Let's not limit that to one subset of our guests. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bill. Next card I have is Mr. John King. Okay. He does not wish to speak, so let me see if anyone else wishes to speak. Please come forward, state your name and address.
My name is Loretta Roman. I live at 698 Counselor's Way. I've lived in Williamsburg for the last 4 years, but I've been visiting here for 25. Colonial Williamsburg is the reason I live in Williamsburg. I see this amendment can be argued on two levels. One, from a historic experience standpoint, I have enjoyed the revolutionary city experience. I understand why they want to close off the street. I'm sorry, but I do disagree with you. I remember when I first came here, cars could still drive down the streets in the evening in Colonial Williamsburg. If it was dark in the fall and you walked down the street, sometimes you took your life in your hand because the people were driving down the street and so busy looking at the houses, they forgot to look for pedestrians. Our experience was so much more enhanced when we started coming and those cars no longer accessed the street. So from a purely historic standpoint, I think our guests would get a much better experience if they come in, they see the historic area, they take it in pieces, they take it all in hand. Colonial Williamsburg is not asking to shut the street from 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. They're asking to close it for an amount of time. Citizens can still come, they can still stroll. The entire area is not going to be closed off. Again, it's only part of the street. The Palace Green will be open. There are other areas that they can walk. So from that standpoint, you can argue that the historic experience will be greatly enhanced for our visitors if this happens. From a purely economic standpoint, while it is wonderful that people come here and want to experience Colonial Williamsburg is a nonprofit organization. The people who work there make salaries. To keep the city up to keep the Colonial City up costs money. The way they get that money is through ticket sales. We have to find ways to increase those ticket sales. This is a way to do it. At least try. If it doesn't work, we'll find that out. But if it works, that would be great. So I urge that you pass this. I understand it's an emotional issue. I understand that people want to keep the streets open. But again, it's a partial closing. And I think it would enhance everyone's experience if we at least try this a little bit longer and see what happens. Thank you.
Great. Thank you very much. Anyone else wish to speak?
Mr. Mayor, members of council,
I'm John Whitley, and I live at 110 Governor Berkeley Road. This morning, I was awakened by an intense need to drive Dog Street. Needed to see how roped off and barricaded she felt at this time of night. I left home at 2:30 and returned at 4. Spent some time to feel the situation. Frankly, I felt denied and pushed out by the sight of rope, stacked wood, warning signs, etc. And I was in my car at night, not standing before a costume employee, telling me I can't enter without paying the toll. I'm a citizen of our great city who celebrates Colonial Williamsburg every single day, and who knows if CW were not here, we might still be dealing with early 20th century issues. I also know, as someone who interpreted, and that's what we did in this time, the Capitol and Wren building in the mid-'60s, and witnessed the families from mill towns, downtowns, no towns, come to discover the beauty and joy of the place where freedoms evolved. They could walk Dog Street and feel welcomed and included. Likewise, Colonial Williamsburg Foundation over the past 40 years has attempted to create an educational environment, a living museum with electronic access, wherein knowledge flows as people of all backgrounds, races, cultures, etc. can gather to interact, discover, reflect, and grow. Each one of these persons is a guest of our city. But this reverend city, this proposal, this possible appearance of encroachment with its ropes and barriers seems to counter the joys and purposes of CW's mission. It appears as if money and greed has become the reason for CW's insistence to control the dog. I'm fearful CW might be creating an atmosphere of elitism and exclusion. Sure, money is needed to deliver the goods, but denying citizens and guests access to the bloodline, Dog Street, of Colonial Williamsburg is not the way to assure a future based on the past. CW should use its limitless administrative resources to develop strategies to manage costs and create other resources of revenue. But if you do move forward with this extension, do not wait for seasonal reports. Have Mr. Campbell and other members of the CW administrative staff come before you, monthly if needed, twice monthly, every 2 months, to give you reports on the progress. Don't wait until the final bell has sounded. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to speak? Sharon, welcome.
I'm Sharon Scruggs. I live at 119 Woodmere Court, and I appreciate the opportunity to make some comments to you. You know, I'm a big supporter of Colonial Williamsburg. Being the granddaughter of a former city councilman from the time of the restoration's inception, I have a great deal of documentation from the period. I don't know if any of you all have had access to the original agreement, which was created to protect access to the area, but I have a copy here, and I've got a little excerpt for you from that. In reviewing the 1928 City of Williamsburg Agreement, I would like to offer some observations and some comments to this council. One must remember that nearly everyone in the city at that time was a stakeholder in this agreement. Their lives were lived in the geography of the historic area. I tell my guests at the Fife and Drum Inn, as I orient them to Williamsburg, that the story of the restoration is the best story here and could probably never be accomplished today. You could never get the consensus needed to have everyone buy in, never mind the cost. In the case in 1928, there were many factors to consider. The citizens had been the unnamed stewards of these properties. They knew of their historic significance. The town was economically depressed. The buyout included new schools, new shopping districts, new churches and homes. There would be a business boom, first through construction, then through tourism and its related economic opportunities. Over the past 50 years, working for and along with Colonial Williamsburg, I have seen the organization grow in its many facets. It has indeed been the boon to the economy that was envisioned in 1928. But our population has changed. We are no longer geographically handling our needs in the historic area proper. Colonial Williamsburg has, over time, reshaped our lifestyle in regards to our downtown, where we once shopped at the A&P, Rose's, Bacon's Pastry, A&N, and Merchant Square. The stores integral to everyday life have given way to gift shops and restaurants more in tune with vacationing shoppers. Where the historic area for years continued to be a thriving neighborhood of residents, the non-exhibition buildings are now reserved for a few residents, donors, hotel rooms, and offices. Where our courthouse was initially moved 1 block away from the courthouse green, then 5 blocks away, it's now in the county, though on city parcel. And the direction of the historic area has changed. The way the area is exhibited has gone from a walk through the buildings focusing on decorative arts and history to a more focused mission of becoming Americans and the desire to draw in a new generation and a new time. All very good. Each generation that occupies the Goodwin Building has moved the mission of the organization in a specific direction, and mostly for the good. There are many decisions with which locals do not agree, but we cannot micromanage a private organization. This brings me to the current issue of closing Duke of Gloucester Street. In my business as an innkeeper, I find that at least 50% of my guests were here years ago when their parents brought them here, and they'd always wanted to come back, either for themselves and or to share their experience with others. Colonial Williamsburg has been planting these marketing seeds for decades. What greater marketing than the Teachers Institute or electronic field trips? The products division has made Colonial Williamsburg franchise familiar to households around the world. These are seeds planted for future guest potential. A walk down Duke of Gloucester Street serves the same purpose. A good example, Virginia Beach, markets guests to come to the beach for a week and make a day trip to Williamsburg. Many of those people find their time too limited to get the value from the investment in a one-day ticket. But as they walk the streets, they are shopping, they're dining, and many of them are planning a trip to devote more time to really see Colonial Williamsburg. They've had a taste and they want more. The Revolutionary City programming has been very successful. Our guests love it. I personally do not think doing it in a day is a good strategy for marketing. It implies that one can see Williamsburg all in a day and need not to stay any longer, which is the opposite of our Chamber's mission to extend the length of stay. That aside, Colonial Williamsburg has successfully, over the last 6 years, developed presentation areas for programming behind enclosures that effectively limit access to ticket holders. The back of the coffee house, the back of the print shop, the garden at the east advance of the palace are a few that come to mind. I honestly do not see how closing 2 more blocks and tripling the time of restricted access to Duke of Gloucester Street is going to enhance what is already being done well. I do think it is very short-sighted in terms of marketing for future guests. In the agreement made between the citizens and the restoration in 1928, it states, under restrictions, that the grantee or grantees, meaning the restoration, their successors and assigns shall perpetually preserve and maintain as public parks with free access to the public, the Palace Green, the Courthouse Green, and such portion of the Powderhorn Green as is now devoted to public use, and shall keep the same in good condition, but said Palace Green, said Courthouse Green, and said portion of the Powderhorn Green shall never be used for commercial purposes. If the council and citizens in 1928 felt so strongly about these spaces, what would they think about your allowing public streets to have restricted access? They did not even dream the public streets would need protection for public access. This is about control. It is about the investment Colonial Williamsburg makes in that geographic area and whether or not they are getting the greatest possible monetary return on their investment. Various pricing models might be a better approach to achieve that goal. Colonial Williamsburg's financial success and its programming success should not be tied to the city of Williamsburg giving away the town. It is incumbent on this council, as it has been for all councils over the last 9 decades, to view the entire economic picture, the effect on the residents, the effect on the city businesses which support the citizenry of the town. Thank you for your consideration.
Thank you, Chair. Does anyone else wish to speak? If so, please come forward.
I'm Dick Schreiber, 506 Francis Street. Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I speak to you today as a 20-plus year resident of Williamsburg and the former chief business officer of Colonial Williamsburg, with responsibility for marketing and ticket sales, and as an individual who has been deeply involved in the economic realities of the area. My interest is in helping come to a solution that will keep both the city, about which I care, and the organization for which I worked succeed together. I'd like to make 2 points for your consideration. First, There should be no doubt in anyone's mind about the importance of Colonial Williamsburg to the city. A letter to the editor several weeks ago suggested that there was no need to worry about Colonial Williamsburg's effect on the city if it was not granted permission to proceed as requested, because it was already here and had no option to leave, as a normal business might. I'm sure there are others than just the individual who sent that letter who agree with that sentiment. Colonial Williamsburg is in fact here and cannot go anywhere. This sentiment ignores several realities, however. The investments of Colonial Williamsburg are the primary reason this city is what it is. I don't for a minute diminish the College of William and Mary. It and Colonial Williamsburg together have created what brought almost all of us here. Williamsburg was an ailing town when Colonial Williamsburg was founded. Now it thrives. Most of us would not live here without the restoration it has worked towards since the 1920s, a restoration of the historic town that continues to this day, one that will help to ensure that it remains a reason for people to come into the future. Virtually none of the support businesses, such as restaurants and hotels and stores, would have been here. There would have been no reason. I dare say some of the local fortunes that exist here would not have existed. Colonial Williamsburg must be allowed to be vibrant for this to continue. It is also important to remember the tax implications of Colonial Williamsburg. A major element of the city's budget is taxes that do not come from residents. They are room taxes, meals taxes, sales taxes. Together, they amount to more than 35% of city revenues in a year, an amount that must be seen as vital. Anyone who thinks the amounts on which the city depends are not primarily driven by Colonial Williamsburg is mistaken. Aside from what it collects, it causes others to collect because of its successful presence here. Finally, on this subject, on Monday, Colin Campbell showed a slide here of activities that Colonial Williamsburg funds from which all of us benefit. He included not only the more than $6 million that the foundation invests annually to maintain the historic area that we all consider an important part of our annual enjoyment, but events we all attend without concern for whose funds support them, from Grand Illumination to Independence Day to you name it. We are inextricably intertwined with Colonial Williamsburg, and it is our responsibility to remember and respect that relationship. Colin Campbell shows his understanding of that in every action he takes. The second point I would like you to consider. In 14 years at Colonial Williamsburg, I learned many things, not the least of which is that it is an extremely complex organization, as are all educational institutions, and as are all major organizations. As such, they are difficult for those of us not directly involved to fully comprehend. After my years there, and they ended many years ago, I often think that I have all the answers, but I don't. As residents, before you became members of council, you probably had some strong ideas about city operations and decisions. I imagine some of those have changed once you became an insider. It's the same way for all of us. My point here is that only the internal experts can have enough information to have the proper framework for decision making. They won't always be right, but we will only be right by accident because we have no background and knowledge. We need to allow Colonial Williamsburg staff members to determine what they think is best educationally, and because these decisions affect word-of-mouth advertising that creates long-term demand, the ultimate success of the institution as a place to which visitors want to come. On what basis are the rest of us qualified? Colonial Williamsburg is asking for the opportunity to test a program expansion that uses a fraction of the historic area for 6.5 hours a day for about 8 months a year. If it doesn't work for them or for the city, time will expire and a new course will need to be found. If this opportunity is not granted, you'll be denying that educational institution the opportunity of using its classroom for teaching, for the Duke of Gloucester Street has been the centerpiece of the historic area since the 18th century. If Colonial Williamsburg is correct that this programming change is fundamental to its mission and as such fundamental to the visitor experience, and that programming is denied, the historic area will not change in appearance. However, paid attendance will decline. The area will become known as a free street. That will please some, but at what economic cost to Colonial Williamsburg and to the city? If paid attendance declines, there will be less revenue for Colonial Williamsburg to spend, probably meaning a reduction in marketing. Anyone who's watched a business attempt to operate without taking the steps to improve revenue will know the implications. Marketing, events, maintenance will decline. Fewer people will pay to come. There will be fewer tax revenues coming to the city. It will be untenable. While this is just a test you are considering, I think this is a vital vote you will make for the future of the city and the entire area. A vote against this extended test will become, whether now or later, the same as a vote for higher property taxes. When all is considered, I do not believe that is the course most residents would endorse. I urge you to approve this request while working with Colonial Williamsburg as partners to address the rights and needs of residents who also feel strongly about this request for other reasons. Thank you.
Thank you. Does anyone else wish to address council? Please.
Mr. Mayor, members of council, my name is Marshall Warner. I'm Executive Vice President at Chesapeake Bank, located at 1229 Lafayette Street. I'm here to speak as a local business person in support of this extension. We've been fortunate to do business in the city for the last 15-plus years, and as a result, I've got to know many, many business folks, a lot related to the tourism business, a lot located in Merchant Square, both restaurants and retail shops. We're all in the tourism business, whether you're a private citizen or a business person. We enjoy an extremely low tax base because of the revenues generated by the tourists that come to this great city. And to me, we've got to continue to find creative ways in which we can attract new tourists to the great city of Williamsburg. And to me, this certainly is another component of that, and I ask that you support this extension. Thank you.
Great. Thank you, Marshall. Anyone else wish to speak? Yes.
As I've heard some of the speakers, your decision today may determine whether or not I pay higher taxes in the future. If that's the case, if this expansion is so fundamental, as I've said earlier, I'm a little surprised that Colonial Williamsburg would come forward to council on a Thursday expecting it to be granted on a Monday. I'm familiar with the Rev City. I've been down, I've seen the programming, fabulous, terrific. It's been a great success. I still have not seen where the additional programming is so fundamental to Colonial Williamsburg. I am not in their operations, their business operations. I talk to a lot of people and sell a lot of tickets for Colonial Williamsburg. As I look at the Duke of Gloucester, and you go out there on a pretty day, won't be today because I don't think people can traverse it all the way, but there are very few pretty days in the spring or the fall when you will not see hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people walking up and down the Duke of Gloucester Street. If I thought for a second that not allowing the expansion of the time or the distance that already has been granted to Colonial Williamsburg, which again I fully supported, I support now, I support the programming, I support Colonial Williamsburg. If I thought for a second that this would lead to any detriment in their income, I'd be the first one to urge you to expand this restricted space of public property. I don't believe that, and I'm discouraged that someone would indicate to you that And anecdotally, I believe that economically, that's going to make a difference. As far as the relationship, we are intricately entwined, Colonial Williamsburg, City of Williamsburg. It was Williamsburg citizens that rebuilt those buildings. We have a former council member. His father was very involved in building those buildings. I know all of my life, we were ambassadors to the tourist. When we did our job correctly, and we knew that it was going to allow our fathers to sell cars or do whatever they did, it would generate money. But without the citizens of Williamsburg, the investment that John D. Rockefeller first made, it wouldn't have gone anywhere. You had a community that was willing to rally behind this extraordinary idea and investment, and the community has done that, and they continue to do that. I think that it's not unreasonable that we be real cautious with further restriction of public property. Thank you.
Thank you. Anybody else wish to speak? Okay, if not, I'll close the public hearing and come back to council for discussion and action. Mr. Browning, you will be silent. Scott, would you like to begin?
Sure. In June, when Colonial Williamsburg asked for our permission to close the Duke of Gloucester for a trial period, I wasn't provided enough information to determine the merits of the proposal. As a result, I thought it was fair to extend the 60-day trial period so Colonial Williamsburg had time to make their case. In the meantime, I've heard from a number of citizens who are concerned about this proposal. One thing's absolutely certain: the street is the keystone to this community's collective identity. About 90% of those who have contacted me have expressed opposition to restricting access to the Duke of Gloucester. In this group, I was surprised at the number of folks that self-identified as Colonial Williamsburg donors, but still did not agree with the proposed change. They were concerned about the unintended impact on the Williamsburg economy and ultimately on the Williamsburg brand. The most troubling calls came from Colonial Williamsburg street interpreters, the very people the institution relies on to deliver this program. None of these people are in favor of the closure or could reasonably justify why the street should be closed. I wanted to confirm that this wasn't just the sentiment of a few, so I contracted other street interpreters only to find the same thing. As I sit here today, still having been provided little additional information on the impact of the street closure, I'm being asked to act on the hope that closing the street will allow Rev City to be successful and improve the Colonial Williamsburg experience and the Williamsburg brand. Regrettably, all I've been given is hope. I've been provided no empirical data to show this change is necessary or beneficial, or any estimation of what the anticipated impact will be. I cannot, in good conscience, risk the unknowns associated with restricting access to the street, nor can I directly impact the quality of life of the citizens of Williamsburg without knowing more information up front.
Thank you. I didn't prepare a statement. But, it is a, very compelling discussion, and I have to agree with all the speakers, both pro and con. I've had the good fortune of being in the tourism industry my entire life. As Mr. Schreiber pointed out, it's only because of Colonial Williamsburg, and it's not something I take lightly. Back in June, I talked about the collateral damage that I see that this is having. And I've done some research of my own. I've talked to my own customers. I've walked the streets and observed and talked to people on the streets. And there's one impression that really resonated with me, and that was when I watched an unticketed family approach the rope, the barrier, greeted very professionally. It played out just like President Campbell had outlined Monday's discussion. The family turned away, and you could almost see they were just disappointed that they didn't get to go experience it. And in my mind, I was thinking, there's a set of parents who may have been here as children and thought, you know what, my children are of an age now, let's take them to Colonial Williamsburg and let them experience this. Because they had a favorable experience when they were children 25 years ago. But what is the experience for that 12-year-old or that 8-year-old who was turned away today? Will they bring their children back when they're parents? And I don't know. And that, to me, speaks to the collateral damage, is what's going to happen to the tourism brand, the brand of Williamsburg, when our boardwalk, our ocean front, so to speak, is not for free. So, when I talk to my customers, I talked to one today. He's a ticket holder. Comes 2 or 3 times every year. And I was behind the desk, and he said, "Why are you all dressed up?" And I told him I was going to city council, and went through that discussion. And he asked me what kind of issues were before us, and I shared with him this. And you could just see he was deflated when I said that this was the question we were having today. And he said, "Man, you can't do that." And he went on to explain, and sometimes he comes with people who don't buy tickets, and but it's just another example of where I think this message will permeate into the rest of America and to the traveling public that Williamsburg is closing its borders. So with that said, so everybody gets a sense of where I'm going. But I don't think this is a denying this request is the end game for Colonial Williamsburg. I've had the great opportunity to speak to many people, employees that work for Colonial Williamsburg, and they're very smart. They're dynamic, they're creative, and they want to do what's best for their employer, what's best for Colonial Williamsburg. And I think this is an opportunity really to go back to the drawing board, so to speak, and figure out other creative ways that you can deliver the message as you see fit and still be successful without having to take away what so many other people in Williamsburg feel is theirs, and that's the public street of Duke of Gloucester Street. So with that, first of all, I did offer last Monday that, gosh, come back and ask for November 13 rather than November 14. Just seemed to me to be just out of bounds and erring on the wrong, too far to the other extreme. But at this point, I won't be voting to support an extension.
One of the things that's really bothered me about this discussion is the people I've heard from who seem to think that Colonial Williamsburg is the enemy. I've heard that over and over and over, that these people are out to get us. And as one of the speakers said, we are intertwined with Colonial Williamsburg. How many of us would be here if it weren't for Colonial Williamsburg? The other thing that it really bothers me a lot is this idea that that street belongs to the world. The boardwalk in Virginia Beach belongs to the city, and I'm sure they take care of it and they do everything. While Duke of Gloucester Street's a public street, the city doesn't pick up the litter. The city, as somebody said to me, would pave it with asphalt, given its druthers, because it's cheaper. The city does not provide public restrooms down there. This Colonial Williamsburg and the city work together to make this what it is, this important thing in the United States. And it seems to me we are very short-sighted if the foundation, after real thought, comes to us and asks for an experiment, for a trial, something they think will make Colonial Williamsburg better and more successful. And for us to sit here and say, we're not going to do that, I think is just really a terrible mistake. They're only asking to make it better. We all know what's happening with tourism. We can read the numbers on the wall. The thing that has bothered me through the years that I've been here, which is also a long time, people talk about what Rockefeller did and the heritage, and what's happened is Colonial Williamsburg has had to shrink its properties. They've had to become smaller. We used to have a nice green belt around Colonial Williamsburg so that when you came, you knew you were coming somewhere and you knew it was an important place. And you still get that feeling, except that because of their fiscal issues, because of things that are happening, we don't have as much green space around us anymore. Carter's Grove isn't part of Colonial Williamsburg anymore. They've had to make some corporate decisions, and as another speaker pointed out, how are we able to make those corporate decisions for them? They're not asking for a permanent change. They're asking for a trial period to see if this works. I also went down there, and I actually saw a family, didn't have a ticket. They wanted to go to eat, and they were let in, and there was no problem. And it was a very polite, nice way to deal with people. And I think one of the things that I'm sure the foundation is wrestling with is how to handle all these kinds of different people who come and how it works and how it doesn't work. You can't do that in 2 months. You can't do that until November of this year. You've got to give it a chance. You've got to give it, and that's all they're asking us to do, is give it a chance. And I think we should do that.
Thank you. The problem I have is that, we're trying to balance how can we help Colonial Williamsburg best provide an educational program that excites people, brings people here, gets them engaged in thinking about the origins of this country and the role that Williamsburg played as a revolutionary city, against the ability of citizens to use public streets. And that's really what this balance comes down to. One of the problems I have is that if you take either position, that closing this is the best or not closing this is the best, you don't really have a basis for making that decision. The reason to have an experiment is to get answers to those questions and try to figure out what will work best. Are there ways to manage access that is sensitive and doesn't turn future visitors off, but in fact turns them on to, let's go in, let's see what's there, and maybe let's come back. And it goes on. What's the best ticket structure to help people figure out what's the best way for them to experience what we have? And the list goes on. And I think what Colonial Williamsburg has asked and what we're being asked to do is provide an opportunity for experiment. And I think what we can do is do a number of things. We can say, yes, we would do that, but we want reports from you at specific times, and here's what we want those reports to do, and it can be on everything from ticket pricing structure to how access is being managed to what's the response of people who are inside the area, outside the area, ticketed, non-ticketed, visitors, local, go on and on and on. But until we have answers to those questions, I find it extremely difficult to say that this is going to be the boon that creates a new Colonial Williamsburg and a new economy for Williamsburg, or this is going to be the disaster that ends it all. I'm sorry. We do not have the information at this point to do that. And unfortunately, I'm trained as a social scientist, and we look for evidence. And what Colonial Williamsburg has asked us to do is provide an opportunity to provide evidence. It seems to me our responsibility is to say, what kind of evidence do we need so that we can make a decision that is best for the citizens of Williamsburg as well as best for Colonial Williamsburg? When do we need that information? Periodic reports. What kind of information will help us make those decisions? So I really think we need to move forward with this extension with the understanding that if at the end of November, if we ask them to report in beginning of December of this year, if we don't see results that are beginning to move the direction we want, we certainly have the opportunity, I believe, Ms. Sheldon, to say, okay, we don't want to go further with this extension.
Yes, you do.
So I mean, we have the flexibility to do that. If there are promising results, we go on, they operate in the spring, we ask them to come back, say, in June, see what that looks like. But until we do that, I think it's extremely difficult to say, this is going to go one way or the other. So I really urge us as a council to be prudent in this and to think toward the future. And what are we going to learn in this process? And I think we're going to learn a lot. I think Colonial Williamsburg is going to learn a lot. And at the end of that process, I think we'll be in a position to say, yes, this worked. No, this didn't work. Here's the direction we need to go. So I really think we need to provide this opportunity for experimentation.
I would only point out, Rev City has gone on since 2006. And Rev City, as exists under the existing permit, is a microcosm of what is expanded Rev City. So to say that we don't have any information because we didn't give it a try today, we've been giving this a try since 2006. I think it's a very safe bet on our part to implement your study, all these metrics, and focus it on the few hours a day that Rev City is already closed under the existing permit. I will better know at that point whether to justify the risk of the risk to the community at large on a larger scale. I can get there, but it's going to take some better knowledge up front.
I think the proposed Rev City program is Rev City multiplied many times, and I'm not sure you're going to get the same results from the existing Rev City program, both in its location and timing, that you're going to get with a Rev City that begins outside the managed access area, that gets people engaged with storming the palace in the morning. I'm not sure I like the 10:30 to 5. I think that's another thing that can be experimented here. What's the right time to do this? But, if you stick with the existing Rev City program, you're going to get some information, but you're not going to get, I think, the kind of information that will let you make a decision, a good decision about whether this expanded Rev City will work or not, because I think they are different animals, and you can find out something, but I'm not convinced that what you find out with the existing Rev City program is necessarily applicable to what is a dramatically different program.
Your point taken, but also I was going to suggest, as Councilman Foster did, that we have a period of time now where it's closed, where ticketed guests, unticketed guests would be confronted, turned away or not, have the opportunity to buy a ticket or not. There's still an opportunity to collect data. There's still an opportunity to reevaluate the ticket strategy. So whether this happens today or not, there's still, I think the onus is still on Colonial Williamsburg to come back, if they believe in this, come back at a future point to say, here's what we learned within the parameters that we've been dealing with since 2006. We provide them, I know that you had worked on some questions or some things that you felt Colonial Williamsburg should be asking and researching. There's still that opportunity for them to do that. Come back in January and say, here, we've taken the last 4 months. This is what we've discovered based on, our research. Then we have more of a basis to make a decision at that point.
The problem I have with that argument is that Rev City has been working for a while. How many complaints have any of us heard of people being denied access to the smaller Rev City program?
I've personally been turned away, but...
How many complaints have you heard from people?
None.
None?
Well, none that I can recall. So,
well, we have an experiment there. It's the people that experience say it's incredibly successful. Even speakers speaking against the expansion, say the existing Rev City is an incredibly exciting experience. Why not provide the opportunity to do it in spades, to do it on steroids, and let's see what happens?
And I'd like to ask one more time, Mr. Foster, what's the risk? You mentioned the risk. What's the risk?
I would ask the roughly 80 people that have contacted me who are concerned about, A, the people who are turned away who didn't have any intention of buying a ticket. That's often a repeat visitor. The risk, in addition to the ripple effect based on that population. Mr. Cafey's pointed out that over 1 million, in 2010, over 1 million of the people that walked that street did not buy a ticket. I want to have some idea what's going to happen to them before I put that on the line.
But
and I don't think that's too much to ask.
How would we know until we try?
That's exactly why you do this experiment, so that you can get an answer to that question. And I'm not sure the answer is going to be, yes, we go with this. You know, we may well end up with the answer that this really isn't working the way we thought it would be. We need to go back to the drawing boards. But until we do the experiment, I think it's extremely difficult you can speculate about the answers you think you're going to get, but you're not going to know until you actually do the research and see what goes on in that.
I need to know more before I'm going to make a judgment call on the impressions of over 1 million people.
But how are you going to find that out?
I've offered a somewhat, a microeconomy of how to do that. We at least would be better off than we are today as far as what we know.
This is an entirely different program, though. This is bigger. It's a different time. So how can you translate?
It would be a seed to the larger thing. I think it's worthwhile.
I think you're dealing with a fallacy of assuming it works here and that therefore it will work the same way at a larger level, and that's a common problem that we have in research, and I think until you do it with a Rev City program that really engages people in many more ways, provides many more opportunities for individuals to experience the revolutionary time period and the idea of revolutionary city. I think until you allow that experiment to take place, I think you're not going to have the information to make a good decision.
Well, I'm mindful that somebody said to me one time, how do you eat an elephant? One bite at a time. And for me to go from where we are today with what's permitted to what's being proposed over the next 15, 16 months would be biting the elephant, trying to eat it all in one bite, and we can't do that. I think it's a fallacy to think that Colonial Williamsburg cannot come back in a month or two with some information, or 3 months with some information based on the 2-hour limited access that goes on today, the way Rev City is run today. And I think they can do that.
It's hardly a whole nother bite. It's only another block.
Yeah, it's a small area. They also can experiment with, area, location of program, timing of program. You're not trying to bite the whole elephant. You're trying to say, you take the bites, tell us what they tasted like, and then we'll figure out whether this works for us and works for you too. So I think we'll be making a real mistake if we don't allow this experiment to take place. And I think I've said that often enough. I don't know if anybody else is ready. Judy, do you want to offer a motion and let's see where it goes, or does anybody else have anything to say?
Yes, I'd like to make a motion, and it'll take a minute. So I'd like to move that City Council approve extension of the amended special event license to conduct Colonial Williamsburg's expanded Revolutionary City program on a continuing trial basis through November 26, 2014, conditioned upon the applicant providing interim reports to the city on the status and results of the trial not later than the first week of January, July, and December 2014. Reports on the trial extension should include, but not be limited to, a description of the operation of controlled access policy and methods, Revolutionary City program activities, including analysis of any changes in methods, timing, or location of program elements related to the license, results of a survey research on visitor experience relative to controlled access and programs, including the experience of visitors on the Duke of Gloucester Street, inside and outside the controlled access point, both ticketed and non-ticketed, local and non-local. Economic trends related to the special events license, including Colonial Williamsburg ticket sales, the estimated number of ticketed guests and non-ticketed visitors, indicators of revenue and non-ticketed business activity, and comparisons with benchmark institutions. Information on Colonial Williamsburg ticket structure and pricing, Good Neighbor program, transactional improvements such as an on-site mobile device ticket sales, new audience attraction, and other information relevant to performance under the special events license. Further, that the existing license agreement be amended to reflect these changes and conditions, which shall be executed by both parties. Finally, Colonial Williamsburg will make its application for extension or changes to the special events license for the period beginning March 2015, not later than the first week of December 2014.
Do I have a second? If not, I'm going to second this because I think that list of information we're asking for depends upon a change in programming. If there's no change in programming, how are you going to measure changes in any of those things we've asked for? So, unless you allow this opportunity to experiment, to change the program and see how changes in program affect changes in these measures, well, how are you going to know anything? So I think it's critical that we do this, as I've said before. So that's the longest second I've ever made. We have a motion and a second. Ms. Scott, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knudsen?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
No.
Mayor Holman?
Yes.
Vice Mayor Freiling?
Abstain.
And Mr. Foster?
No.
The motion fails. Thank you all very much. This has been a very good and interesting discussion. Our next order of business is reports. The first of those is the monthly financial statements. Jack, anything in particular?
We are 1 month into the new fiscal year, and I have nothing to report.
Any questions on financial reports? Monthly department operating reports.
I have nothing in particular to point out, but if there are any questions on the operating reports, we'd be happy to address them.
Any questions for City Manager? City Manager reports, we have two, and I'm going to ask Council if, with their permission, to reverse the order of these and take the Stryker Center PPEA process first and then do the contract between the city and the library second. Is that acceptable?
I think that's probably right.
Okay. Stryker Center. Jack?
Yes. The decision before the council today is to pick up with the discussion that took place both at the special meeting a week and a half ago and in Monday's work session as to how to proceed with the PPEA, Public-Private Education and Facilities Infrastructure Act, a process that the city's been engaged in since February for the Stryker Center. At the special work session at that time, you heard the recommendation of the staff review committee, consisted both of city staff and library staff, that reviewed proposals submitted, a total of 5. That was winnowed down to 3, and then you heard the recommendation of the committee to move forward with one of the proposers to the next stage in the process. Council discussed that in some detail on Monday. So the decision before you now is how to dispose of that recommendation at this point in the process. So without going in, we can always go into further detail about the proposals themselves or any of that information, but since that's already been before you and before the public, That, just by way of introduction, be happy to answer any questions or go further as you would like.
Are there any questions at this point for Mr. Tuttle or the city attorney? Typically, in these situations, when we come to council for comment and discussion, I allow my colleagues to speak before I express an opinion. Today, I'm going to deviate from that tradition because I believe having something concrete on the table as a foil to agree with or disagree with will help us to iterate toward a consensus on how best to proceed. I think it's clear as a result of the discussions we've had that we all want to get this thing right, to have a new Stryker Center that serves the library, the city, and the community, and that provides a signature building for City Square that enhances one of this city's jewels. I think that moving forward at this time with discussions with Henderson Tingle has the potential to get us where we want to be. But if that fails, to still have moved us closer to the final product we want, because at that point we can either start a new PPEA process or turn to one of the other proposers in the existing PPEA process. I believe there are multiple reasons for going this direction. First, continuing discussions with Henderson Tingle in public work sessions with ample opportunity for public input, in essence a series of design charrettes, will enable us to refine the design both of the internal floor plan and, more importantly, of the external look and feel of the building, and to see if we can get the home run we're all looking for. It will also involve the public directly in the process and can answer the questions that some have regarding the process to this point. Second, if the discussion with Henderson Tingle are successful over the next few months, we would be in position to move forward expeditiously and have a new Stryker Center serving the library and the community much sooner rather than much later. Third, time is of great importance for two reasons. First, construction cost and interest rates are exceptionally low now, but will likely go up the longer we wait. Second, in the not too distant future, we face funding a new school administration building and a new middle school. I do not believe that it's to our advantage if financing all three of these get commingled in a discussion. Fourth, while we take some risk, I think they're pretty small, in pursuing discussions with Henderson Tingle, even if we fail to get to where we want, we as a council will have a much better vision of what we want and a clearer list of design elements and building components than we do today. Thus, I believe that continued discussions over the next few months with Henderson Tingle in an open and transparent process will either get us to where we can say, yes, this is it, let's move to a comprehensive agreement with Henderson Tingle, or no, we're not quite there, let's begin the process of going to another design architectural firm to get what we want. Going forward with public work sessions, essentially design charrettes, with Henderson Tingle at this time does not preclude the latter and may well get us the home run we are looking for by the end of those discussions. It's all yours.
Oh, thank you. I don't disagree with anything you said. And making this choice to go with the recommended design build team may well move us closer to where we want to be. The problem, though, is that I don't think we yet know where it is we want to be. I don't think we've had the appropriate amount of discussion, and that's on us. We had very good discussion this past Monday at the meeting, and I think it was one of the more substantive conversations we as a group have had about what we really want to see in this building. I would prefer to continue that discussion. I prefer that we refine what our vision is for this very important project. And as I said last week, in the beginning, I wasn't even supportive of moving forward with this. But I've become convinced that this is a necessary and valuable improvement in the city's infrastructure for a number of reasons, which I think most of us appreciate, so I won't go into those now. But we haven't yet fully explored the other potential of a new Stryker Center. And we may have that conversation and determine we don't want to do anything more than have a council chamber and expand a library space and possibly some function space and a catering kitchen, and that's fine. But let's have that conversation first, because if we have that conversation and we decide or determine that what we're looking for is really something more than that, it's something different, then let's put it out. If it's significantly different, we should put it out for another round of design offers so we take everything into account. Because as you've said, we haven't yet seen what we know we want. So we're still finding our way. I think it's incumbent upon us to find our way first and then either make that decision to go with the recommended proposal or go with another proposal against the committee's recommendation or open it up. But I just don't think we're at the point yet where we can, I don't think. Yes. And that's what I'm saying. I don't really disagree with anything you said, except I think we need to have that conversation.
I don't disagree with what you've said either, but it seems to me that a good way, not the only way, but a very good way and one that could be very productive to have the very discussions you've talked about is with an architect and a building firm in the room with us at the time. So when I say, oh, I think we ought to do X, Y, and Z, and they say, well, you can do it, but here's what it's going to do to the cost, they've got the expertise to do that. I think having that discussion with that type of expertise in the room is the very reason I'm proposing to go forward, not to a comprehensive agreement with them, but into discussions to see if we can get to that point. So we have the architectural, the engineering, the construction expertise that we need to make the decisions and to figure out exactly what you said. What is it that's going to work best for us? Yep.
I see merit in both points. And I too would have, I think we all would have benefited from a visioning conversation, one that, is probably a little more broad than, well, if we do this, this is how much it costs. So I'm erring on a little bit of the side of Paul, the fact that we need to come up with the broad parameters.
Right.
And the brass tacks, structural cost discussions may not cloud that kind of idea generation process. But I do appreciate what you're saying about, being able to get immediate response.
I think if we go forward with those kind of discussions, if we do it without hiring an engineering and architectural firm to be there with us, we're going to be, we're not going to have very productive discussions, because I think the discussion we had Tuesday, discussions we've had among our, one-on-one with each other, I think there's a fair amount of agreement and consensus about things. I think there are lots of major issues still out there, but I think the most productive way to get those on the table and have them is to do it with some expertise in the room with us. And if we don't choose to go forward and have these discussions with Henderson Tingle, then I think we can go forward and have them. But I think if we don't hire somebody to be in the room that has that expertise, we're going to be visioning. But whether vision, as Tim Sullivan once said, there's a fine line between vision and hallucination. We need to walk that line, and having somebody in the room that can help us stay on the vision side and keep away from the hallucination side is very useful. So that's why I'm proposing to do this with Henderson Tingle. We don't have to, but if we do it with somebody, I think we have to do it with somebody in the room that knows more about architecture and building construction and engineering than the five of us do.
I'll agree that doing it with good advice is the best way forward, whichever form that takes. We'll still discuss.
It's clear to me that I think we messed up this process a long time ago. We should have had some of these substantive discussions early on so that the vision of the community, the vision of council could have been better laid out going into the process of soliciting an architect and a design firm. The process wasn't perfect, and I can't prescribe a perfect process moving forward. I think we have lots of thoughts. I still go back to the most affordable way to approach this versus, and as Councilman Freiling, Vice Mayor Freiling had just stated, I'm in a different position today about the Stryker complex and what it means to the library, what it means to the community than I was 2 months ago, 3 months ago. But I don't think we have, to use Councilman Foster's term, tickled or teased out yet what it is that best fits in this location. And so I called the city attorney's office and kind of talked about how do we extend this PPAE process, process another 100 days so that we can have these discussions. Councilman Hoagland suggested that we need to kind of get into the room and kind of shake this out, and I think that there's merit to that. And I think we can do it with all three architects in the room, and challenge them to come back with new designs that has a better understanding of what it is that we in the community are looking for.
I guess one question is that possible under the PPEA process to?
According to the city's guidelines, this is what City Council can do. Not proceed further with any proposals, to proceed with detailed phase of review of the original proposal, proceed to the detailed phase of review with a competing proposal, proceed to the detailed phase of review with multiple proposals, and to request modifications or amendment to any proposals. Now, let me caution you, you cannot negotiate with all three. You can talk about this in a conceptual way, but you cannot negotiate an agreement with all three at the same time. You've got to limit that or make a decision.
The other thing I'd like to respond to is in the way that public buildings are designed, typically staff, with the approval of the governing body, begins to put together essentially working document that ultimately would come to the body for the kind of discussion we're talking about. The problem here is that in putting together those working documents, normally what would have happened, that would have come to council, and council would have begun the process we're talking about. What happened here is an unsolicited PPEA proposal came in. We said, let's go with that process. That's what derailed the type of discussion that we would normally have had under this. What we're doing now is through this PPEA process is having those discussions, and I think the question facing us is what's the best way to go forward with those discussions? Is it to do it with one of the teams in the room with us to come out? I'm not sure I want to be in any room with three architects talking about design, but if that certainly may be a possibility.
Let me start by saying I don't think we're ever going to get the perfect building. There is no such thing as the perfect building unless it's a Georgian thing from over in England. I mean, we all have different ideas of what this building is going to look like, what it's going to be. What we need is a building that functions. I think I want it to look nice. I want it to fit in. I'm not an architect. I don't see these things well. But I want it to work. And it seems to me that we have talked and talked about what we need for it to work. We need more room for city council. We need more room for the library. We need more meeting rooms in the community. And I think that's the function of this building. Now, if we want to talk more about other functions, I think the mayor has a good way to talk about it. We can spend a couple of months with the company that was chosen by the committee And they're the ones who did all the research. That committee worked really hard, looking at doing all the recommendations, presenting that big book. So we work with that committee to not only look at what it looks like and try to come up with something we can all sort of agree with, but something that really functions and does what we need it to do. So I support the mayor. I think he's got the right direction. If at the end of 2 months we're not happy, again, as you all know, I don't want to put this off any longer than we have to, because I also agree with I think we need to move. For one thing, I continue to be offended by sitting here in a building that's only used a couple times a month, and the city's paying for this air conditioning. So speaking of fiscal mismanagement. So I agree with the mayor. I think we need to do something. We need to move forward, and I think this is a good way to move forward.
Any further discussion?
Discuss or help me understand what would be the benefits of starting PPEA over?
As I understand it, and Chris, you and Jack may jump in, we're in a PPEA process. If we choose to go forward with discussions with one of those firms, as I've suggested, we refine the planning and what have you. If at the end of that process we're not where we want to go, we have one of two options, I believe. One is to say, no thank you, and go to another of the proposers and go through that same process again. And if we're not satisfied at the end of that, to go to another of the proposers. If at the end of that, or at any point in there, we can say, no, this is not being very productive, let's go back and start a process over again, and that process starting over again could be either a design bid build process or a design bid process. Under the design build process. Under the design build process, I think that would be a new PPEA process. Is that correct, Chris?
It may be or it may not.
May not. It could be or could not be. So we could choose to do a PPA process, or we could just, have a design competition, choose an architectural firm and builder and say, bring us a product.
Right.
So, yeah. It seems to me we've got lots of options. The question is, what's the best way to move us forward so that, we have productive and productive discussions that get us to or closer to where we want to be. And right now, I think where we are right now, the best way to do that is with a team that's been recommended by the committee that evaluated them. There are lots of things I like about their design. There are lots of things I don't like about their design. But I think in that those, bringing the public in, having those design charrettes, I think we have an opportunity to get either where we want to be or closer to where we want to be in the most efficient and expeditious manner. So that's why I think this is advisable to go this direction. You can do it lots of different ways, but how are you going to do it most efficiently and most quickly? I think that's what.
And I'm challenged, and nothing disparaging about the architect in this plan. I think he's an outstanding architect, but I didn't find it didn't address some of the issues about, because it's a complete tear down, and I still believe that there's value in some preservation of this building, bricks and mortar, but it's part of our history, and I'm afraid that if we go with the Guernsey-Tingle plan, we're going to lose all that. And from my perspective, I'm not willing to do that, and so that's why I kind of suggested if we could extend the current plan, current PPE, allow each of the three to hear from all of us, and if we could build a consensus or not, and I may be the only man out there, but then these three architects can come back with a new plan that incorporates all of what we're looking for. And there's no all or nothing, I understand that.
Sorry.
Yeah, no, I guess a question for Chris is if we went forward with discussions with Henderson Tingle on this, could part of that discussion say, well, the existing building, what could be done, what have you? So that wouldn't preclude having those discussions in this manner. And you're doing it with a top-notch builder that has incredible experience and expertise, and with an architectural firm the same. I think having that kind of expertise in the room when we have these discussions, we would pay a chunk of money to get that kind of experience and expertise. And I think here we have an opportunity to use it.
I just come back to a couple of months ago, we were having, not this conversation, but a related conversation. And Mr. Tuttle advised us, if we're talking about a sedan and we're going to build a sedan, then you can make changes to whatever proposal has been submitted once you've chosen your architecture and construction firm. You just work through that process, and I understand that. But if you've chosen a sedan and you really want to build an SUV, then you probably want to look at it differently, because you're making a decision based upon the sedan, not on the plans for the SUV. And I'm not saying we want to build the SUV. I'm just saying I don't know that we know what we want. I would prefer, my personal opinion, that we figure that out and we come to whatever degree of agreement we can, whatever level of consensus, before we make a decision on moving forward with whether it's the recommended.
But that's exactly what this allows us to do, because we're not negotiating a comprehensive agreement with them. We are looking at the design, rethinking the designs, all sorts of things with this firm and this expertise while we do it. It doesn't preclude any of what you're talking about, it seems to me, in moving forward with this.
And there are two ways that I see that as not quite fair. One is, if we move forward, and as you said, if we had to pay for people to provide the consulting or advice, we might have to pay a fair amount of money to get that. So we're going to be using two entities' time and taking advantage of their knowledge base and their experience with no guarantee that we're going to use them, but they're going to help us get to where we want to go. And if we decide we're going to open it up to other people, then that's what we're going to do. That doesn't seem right. Nor does it seem right that if we're going to do this and then we're going to open it up to other people, we've had somebody too closely aligned with what we're talking about. I mean, whenever we have these conversations, they're public meetings.
Yeah.
Any architect, any engineer can come and participate and listen, and that's why I don't know that I'm not trying to forcefully argue this, I'm just expressing my opinion. I'm just not there to make that decision today, because I don't think we are where we need to be.
So what process would you suggest?
Yeah, how do we get to where we need to be?
I think
efficiently and expeditiously and at the least cost.
I think the first thing we do is ask staff to consider how we could do this in our retreat, which is scheduled for September 7th. And put this as, I know we have other things to talk about, but this is very important. Put this as a primary topic of discussion. Invite all of the applicants to come and sit in and listen. And let's hash through. And, we may come out of that conversation and we're nowhere farther down the road than we are today. And if that's the case, then maybe we do need to make a decision and go with a proposal or an architecture and engineering firm, a construction firm, and move forward.
But that's a whole month away, that retreat.
It's a month.
It is only a month. It's a short time, given the gravity of what we're talking about. I think if we have the opportunity to do it right and be able to know it when we see it, 30 days, 100 days is just a small.
I think you're fooling yourself if you think if we start the process a new way that it's going to be done any time in the next couple of years.
Perhaps you
I think-
misunderstood me. I did not suggest that we start a new way. What I'm suggesting is trying to stay within the PPEA process so that we don't get into a design-build, bid-build design program. I'm trying to avoid that and try to stay within a system that can hopefully get us to a decision in short order.
And we're already in that system. Back to Paul's point, the firms that would be participating are taking a risk in doing that. If they don't want to take that risk, they say, no, we don't want to do that. So, I don't think it's taking advantage of anybody in that process. And I think, by the time we have those discussions, we come back to it, I think we're going to lose multiple months, and then I think we're going to be into an election time. I think then we're going to say, well, maybe we want to wait till after this to move forward and what have you. I just see this as a potential black hole that could put this whole project many years down the road rather than moving forward in an efficient and effective manner at this point. But I've said that once or twice before, I think.
And the other thing is we asked a committee made up of, there were members of our staff to look at this, and they did, and they worked hard, and they asked for a little extra time so they could do it right, and they gave us a recommendation. And we're sitting here saying, we don't want to listen to that.
No, we're not.
What are we saying?
What we're saying is we didn't have the appropriate amount of conversation amongst ourselves prior to the committee convening to review proposals that were based on an unsolicited proposal that we had no input in.
Could I make a comment on that? It's true, the unsolicited proposal came in without the city first putting out an RFP. However, it was based upon a conceptual plan that to define program and program components that was laid out in the CIP and adopted by council in the CIP, reiterated and adopted last November in the goals program, and also as part of your comprehensive plan. So that was the basis, that was the core, the what question. I think what's happening is that now you're saying that maybe that what didn't answer really where we'd like to think of this. So there's still programmatic issues that you want to talk about. And the question, I guess, is whether the scope of those programmatic issues is so broad that that really justifies saying we really need to drop back and not even have a discussion with whichever one of the proposers that you would choose. But I do must say that agree with the mayor's approach that the best way to move forward with both the program issues, the programmatic issues, the functional issues, the issues with regard to how the building will look, the best way to do that is with one of the teams that can work through that process and provide that design charrette type of approach. Listen to the council, go back, bring back information through a series of meetings, and I think, and I believe with the mayor that you will get there with whichever one of the teams you decide, within the context fundamentally of the proposal that they gave you. Now, it is true that one of the proposals was to save this building and put a new building with a hyphen, fundamentally different from the other two. But barring that, I think that's the most effective way to move forward. And again, as the mayor said, I think it's a good point that if that proposer, you work with them through a series of meetings, and if you come to the end of that process and decide that we must start over because what we want to build is so substantially different from the conceptual plan that the original proposal was based on that we need to start over. But the proposer will know that in fact is a possibility. They know that right now based on this discussion, and they have to make their choice whether they want to continue at risk through that period of time, and what they will spend obviously as part of that time with you and with the library as well, because they're partners in this And so I believe, again, as the mayor said, that that's the most effective way to get where you want to be and still leave all of your options open.
All I'm asking is we have a conversation on September 7th to hash some of this out in our retreat. We come out of there, if we feel like we've hit a place where the building's going to be not so different, then let's vote on September 12th, which that's the meeting date after the retreat, the
Correct.
following
Yes.
Thursday.
Following Thursday.
That's all I'm asking. I just want us to have that conversation before we make that decision. And it may be that we'll go, just as you said, Mr. Mayor, and choose the committee's recommendation. But I just don't feel like we have had enough opportunity to talk about our collective vision for this building, for its function, for its use, and for what it's going to mean to the city going forward.
How is the conversation at the retreat going to be different from this conversation?
Well, we're not going to be talking about, we're going to be talking more about the building in that conversation and less about who's going to design it and build it.
How's it going to be different from the conversation we had on Monday?
It'll be a continuation of that conversation.
And why wouldn't that conversation benefit from having a construction firm and an architectural firm as part of that?
As I said, it's a public meeting. If they want to come, they can come. If we want to ask their opinion, they can share their opinion. Just like when we ask the public for their opinion, they share their opinion. That's all. I don't know why we're. 1 month doesn't seem to me that much to ask for us to have the conversation. I wish we'd started this conversation 5 months ago, or I'm sorry, I don't know the exact month, or whenever the unsolicited bid was first received, that we sat down and hashed through what do we really want in this building, but we didn't. And now we're at the point where I think we need to.
No, I'll echo that sentiment. I suggested 100 days. If we can get through a September work session where this is a focal point of our discussion, I think we'll all be better served. I think if we rush to make a decision today, I would leave this meeting somewhat suspect. And I would imagine many in the community would have some ill feelings as well. And I think we would all be better. Clearly, there's not a consensus here now. We would all be better served, and we would better serve the citizens if we continued the discussion.
Just practically, in the last week and a half, I've been approached with a new idea that none of us had ever had for this building. On a use for this building, and I've only had time to talk about it with Clyde. So I can see that. I mean, we probably need to have that conversation before there's an architect in the room, because so far it has not been a clean process. So there's a lot of ideas thrown out there that I think would be better for us to get on the same page.
That's just endless, because somebody can come in October with an idea, and somebody can come in November with an idea. And, it's just, at what point do you say, okay, this is the way it's going to be?
Having them in the room doesn't mean every discussion and every issue that comes up necessarily draws on their expertise, but almost everything that we'll get into at some point, we're going to want to turn and say, what does this mean in terms of building, design, cost, what have you, as we work through it? Because again, I think having that concrete ability to turn to experts when you need them is extremely useful in this kind of discussion. And I think there's no disagreement here, I believe, about the moving forward and the types of discussions we need to have and what have you. The question really is, what's the best and most effective format for those? And is it with one of these teams, or is it to have a retreat, make these discussions, then decide whether we want to have these discussions with a team or not?
So we would practically be scheduling. We would be able to schedule all of us to get together before the August 7th retreat with an architect to have a substantive discussion about this. So that's the only thing that's going to move the timeline up. Because if that meeting can't happen until after September 7th, then we might as well talk about it at the retreat.
I would guess that the design team is ready to talk at any time. Question is, are we? And if we could have a meeting or two before that, we're that much further down the line. And we can wait. The world's not going to end, but it seems to me that moving forward this way gets us into a situation where we have the expertise in the room that can help us when we need it. We can do it even more quickly, and again, we're not locking ourselves into anything at this point. So, well, I think we've probably, unless anybody else has anything they want to say, I'll take a motion either to go one direction or the other.
I don't want to vote against recommending a particular team, because that sends the message that I don't want to send. It's not about any of the proposals. It's not about any of the players involved in creating the proposals. It's about us having adequate conversation about what I think we need to come to grips with about this building. And that's why I would suggest that, I don't know if it's appropriate to table this or...
Well, it would be a motion to refer to your retreat.
That would be my motion, to refer this to the retreat.
I do want to second that motion.
We have a motion and a second on the table. Ms. Scott, would you call the roll?
Ms. Newton?
No.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
No.
Vice Mayor Fryling?
Aye.
And Mr. Foster?
Aye.
So we'll continue this discussion at our retreat. Thank you all very much. This has been a very good discussion. Our next order of business is the contract between the library and the Stryker Center. I think given where we are today, we might want to table that or postpone it till some future date. What's your recommendation, Chris?
You can postpone it. You can pass it because the agreement is contingent on council building the building. So if council decides not to build the building, then the agreement is null and void. If council decides to build the building, you have the agreement in place.
What's your preference?
I'd like to pass it. I'd like to take care of it now.
And I don't see the harm in passing it. I think if through our discussions things materially change and the library doesn't like those changes, they have the right to exit the agreement.
They do. Okay.
I don't know that that's going to be the case, and I think as a measure of good faith on my behalf, I would move that we accept the agreement. I don't have it up here, so I don't know the exact motion, but I would move that we approve the contract between the library, the city, and the library for the Stryker Center. That the City Council approved the proposed contract between the city and the library, setting forth the obligations, rights, and responsibilities of the parties for the development and operations of the proposed Stryker Center project. Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please?
Can we have just a little bit of conversation? Yep. Mr. Total, when you described the contract to us on Monday, you gave some criteria that had to be met regarding the construction of the building from the library standpoint. Could you review those again?
Yes, sir. The agreement provides that the building will be at least 14,000 square feet overall, unless the library were to agree to some lesser amount, but it provides that. It provides that it will have a minimum of 5 administrative offices for the library, 3 public meeting rooms at their primary disposal, and include a foyer, pre-function/exhibit space. And so that's the major components of the building that the library is requesting or expecting in the agreement. And it also provides for the library funding to assist of $500,000 a year back to the city, plus up to $250,000 for equipment and furnishings.
Can I ask Mr. Clayton a question?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
Mr. Clayton, do you recall the proposed square footage of the, is it Hopkey Jordan proposal?
I've got it right here.
That one was, that was a smaller one. That was 13,000.
12,942.
I respect the library's interest in this project, and I understand, thank you. I understand their need to ensure adequate space. I don't know why they're so concerned, and I'm not saying Mr. Mormon is or isn't concerned with this. I don't know why we have to have a number in there on the minimum square footage of the building, particularly when one of the proposals that's been put forward, upon which we have not yet voted, is below the threshold that is in that agreement. And I know it can be changed if the library agrees, but it just seems odd to vote on this now with that minimum square footage threshold when we haven't decided which project we're going with.
Mr. Mayor, if I could on that point, the 14,000 square feet came from the fact that again, back to the concept plan that all this was based on was just over that. So the library, in a sense, is saying we are comfortable with the footage, the space that is available in the concept plan. And if the city decides to build something smaller than that, then we want to make sure that still meets our needs. But that's why it says that, as opposed to saying that the city will build the concept plan. It simply uses the number in place of saying a particular layout. So it gives greater flexibility, actually, but the library wanted some assurance. Mr. Mormon is here and he can speak to it, but the library, the board wanted some assurance that what the city built was going to be of adequate size to meet their minimum needs.
So if I'm understanding you correctly, we could go ahead and approve this. Then what if we build a 13,500 square foot building?
We would need to go back and ask the library to amend that portion of the agreement, and they would say, well, then we would amend it.
Say yes or no.
They'd say yes or no.
But we're not bound to build that? They're just not bound to be part of the contract?
If we were to do less than that, they would need to agree to that change. Yes, sir.
Which, if we didn't approve this now and we chose a smaller project, they would need to agree to it at that point.
They would need to agree to it then anyway. So either way, because they have already approved this agreement and signed it.
This contract doesn't bind us to do anything particular.
It was just the 14,000 square feet struck me as a curious number. So I'm fine.
My second.
Yep, we have a motion and a second. Any further discussion? Scott, would you call the roll, please?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
Next order of business is unfinished business. I believe we have none.
Correct.
New business, I believe we have some appointments.
Yes, we do. Mr. Mayor, I move that City Council reappoint Marion Ross to the Peninsula Agency on Aging effective October 1st, 2013, for a 3-year term to expire September 30, 2016.
Second.
I have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Ms. Knutson?
Aye.
Mr. Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland?
Aye.
Mr. Foster?
Aye.
That brings us to our final agenda item for the day, which is open forum, a time when anyone who wishes to address council on any issue may do so. If you'd like to address the council, please come forward, state your name and address. Please come forward.
I am Barry Martin. I live at 8 Lavelle Court, and I'm president of the Williamsburg Regional Library Foundation. Just wanted to make one comment about possible renovation of the existing Stryker building as part of an ongoing project. I think from the foundation standpoint, I don't think it's in the interest of the library or the city to do that. If I recall, I believe on the city website, there is a statement that this building was last renovated in 1989, and in 2002, there was a detailed engineering survey of the Stryker building, which recommended at that time that it be demolished and replaced over rehabilitation. So that's basically my comment.
Right. Thank you very much. Anybody else wish to address council? If not, I believe we have closed session.
We do, Mr. Mayor. I move to go into closed session pursuant to Section 2.2-3711 of the Code of Virginia for the purpose of discussing 2 personnel matters per subparagraph 1 concerning staff evaluation and transition.
Second.
Have a motion and a second. Would you call the roll, please, Ms. Scott?
Mr.
Aye.
Pons?
Aye.
Mayor Holman?
Aye.
Vice Mayor Fryland?
Aye.
And Mr. Foster?
Aye.